This is a demo of painting this little still life that we have set up. So you want to start out with just a very light drawing. You don't want to draw real hard or press real hard. It will dent your paper. Just kind of get a grip. There's not a lot of details. Get a grip on where things are placed. And if you notice, I also draw in some of the shadows, and you can see right there is that part of the orange is a little darker. So I'm just indicating that, doing a basic drawing of my apple, just very basic. There's some cast shadows, straightening things up. So start out with a basic drawing, light, not a lot of details, but just want to work it all out. So you're going to stop the video now, and you're going to choose the still life you're going to paint. You can use this one. You're welcome to use this one, or find some other references. Drawing's done, and now I'm going to start with a light wash, and you've practiced some washes. I'm going to start just kind of with the orange and the lemon, putting down a light wash of yellow. Don't get too heavy-handed with the yellow. It can get very opaque, and you can kind of see a golden tone to that apple, so I laid in some yellow there too. And I'm going to darken the yellow and orange it up a bit, and go ahead and paint that background because it's close to yellow too. So you want to start with just a light layer of value, but a light value. Nothing gets dark just yet when you're working this way with the watercolors. So I'm just going to lay in a light wash everywhere and get a little red in that apple. And I can even add a little bit of orange or red to the darker side of the orange, but I'm not doing a lot. And I want to be careful to leave that edge of the plate white, and you saw I wiped that off, or you can blot it with a paper towel. Watercolor, it's important to keep it light and airy, and what's white on the still life or whatever you're drawing should be the paper, because the paper's white, so you don't have white paint. So you want to be careful. And at one point in this painting, you can see where I lift off some paint to lighten an area, and I'll show you how to do that too. So I'm just laying in the light wash, maybe a little bit of the darker areas in some spots. Figuring that little jar out in the back. It's kind of a brown color, but I don't want you to get used to going to write a black or a brown. And you notice I don't ever use black or brown paint. There's a time for that, but this is not it. I just kind of went with that turquoise color of it, and it's going to be kind of a neutral, cool color in the end. So just starting out with a light wash, again, staying with that rule of light wash, hitting the areas. And the darker areas you can make a little darker, but you're not doing very much detail. And you want to make sure, now I made sure that background was dry before I started that handle. So you have to be patient. You can see the shine on there, so it's not all dry. You have to be patient. The lemon is dry, so I can lay in a light wash for the shadow, the cast shadow on the lemon and the other fruit. And you can see the plate. I just kind of mixed up a light violet. You can see the plate, there's very little of it that's pure white. So the edge of it is probably pure white, but the rest of it is that light violet, and that's going to give it some depth and a shape or some form. So once your drawing's done, you're going to start with just a light wash over your whole painting. Now it's time to look at some darker shapes, and you can see in the picture the green is kind of in a shape. There's light areas in there. I'm going to soften that darker area. One thing you're going to learn as you work on this, and you probably already figured this out, that watercolor dries a little lighter. So that's why you see me sometimes go back. So I'm just right now looking for those darkest areas, being careful to keep them in shapes. I'm not outlining anything. I'm working on the inside of the object. So you can see that that picture now has a little bit more volume with some more color. Now, when you do that inside, I almost went like a blue violet, but then I popped in some blue violets in some other spots in the picture. That's what we call working on the whole painting at once, because if you just did that circle or that hollow spot of the picture blue, it's going to look kind of weird. So I added some of the blue violet to the bottom part or the front part of the picture as well. So that connects it. So I'm looking at the shapes of things and the colors and those darker areas. And as you work on the darker areas, what you're going to find is that you're adding more detail. So you're not doing big areas of color, you're doing smaller areas of color. And that gives you the detail. You're looking for some of those shadows and adding the mediums now. Now it's time for some darker areas. So if you blur your eyes and look at your still life, you can kind of see those areas that need to be a little darker, like around the navel of the orange, and that whole side of the orange is pretty dark. And I do it very gradually. Don't try to do it all at once. Work gradually, work in layers. See when, and I can go back in and soften the edges if it's a hard edge with just a damp brush. And I want to pay attention to that highlight on the orange. I want to make sure I leave that. So don't paint over that area if you want it to stay light. So I'm darkening that edge and that navel area, just looking for those darker details now. Now looking at that orange, that highlight kind of disappeared, so I'm drying my brush off and just kind of going over it, and that popped that highlight back out and made it a little softer. Instead of a hard edge, it made the it more gradual. So I'm working around that orange, just giving it more volume and depth. Now we're going to add into the flower, just looking at the darker areas. So I want to blur my eyes and just work at the dark areas. Don't outline petals or anything like that. Use those paint stroke practice things that we did and just kind of lay down some paint marks and hints of depth or further away areas. You can see I just kind of make some marks and some brush strokes. All those practice brush strokes we did earlier come into play here. So I'm just going back in, adding my darker areas, a little bit of detail, making sure areas are dry before I add it. And I want to push that background back a little bit, so I added a little blue to it. Now I need to add some more color to the tablecloth. So I just kind of go a little bit more color, and that's going to pop out that nice plate, that white plate, and add some shadows underneath the plate. So again, your light source is coming from the left side, so the right side of the tablecloth is going to be a little darker because it's blocking the light. So I'm going a little heavier with my orange. And then the very last step is going to be adding more details. So I'm going to stop talking and just let you watch. Stop the video when you need to and paint. Also remember, I have this way sped up. I do not paint this fast, nor should you. So think about that as you're working. Don't try to paint as fast as I am. And you can see coming into play the washes, the wet and wet, the negative space. Right now I'm working on some negative space. All the things we've been talking about and practicing, now you're applying to an actual painting. So paint slowly, take your time, work in layers, and work up to the details. Now it's time for final details. That's your very darkest areas, and they're just almost lines and marks are all these darker areas are. Just kind of think of lines and marks, some texture in the leaf with some values, and it's not always dark. You can see right there I'm going a little lighter. Kind of look at your still life, look for those details, what's going to finish it off nicely. And then the fun part are the lines on the tablecloth. When you do that, you can see that they're not heavy lines, they're just a little darker orange, and they're not perfect. So don't try to, you don't want to take away from the still life, you just want to make the negative space a little more interesting by adding those lines if you add a texture or a pattern to the cloth. But you can see I'm just kind of, now I'm using more linear line work than whole areas of color for the final details. So we're all done, and you can see the comparison. The color's kind of decent, not perfect or close, and I feel like it got a little heavy-handed in some of the oranges on the orange and maybe on the tablecloth. It could have been a little lighter, but overall you can kind of see that I've got a nice little still life. So make sure you post what you've got finished when you're done.